Hi, I'm Gray Matthews. I teach communication at the University of Memphis, and I'm very grateful to be able to support international educators in their response to systemic racism. And I just want to make a couple of points about the poetics of the protest and the poetics of global outrage and the poetics of relation. And I want to work with a couple of ideas from Edward Glissant and a new book that just was published this year. It was written in the 90s, but just came out in 2020, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So the poetics of protest and the poetics of relation. And two particular concerns that I have. One is very positive, and that is listening as responsiveness. And the negative concern is what I would call systemic arrogance. There's no doubt that racism is systemic, but in systemic racism, there's quite a bit of systemic arrogance. And systemic arrogance is systemic and arrogant in its refusal to listen. So the poetics of protest is certainly the voice and the vibrant expressiveness of people concerned about the lives of others. But there's also a listening dynamic very deep in our protest. And it is what has brought us out in response to the cries of others, to the cry of suffering. Now, before I say something about Glissant's writing, I want to recall something that Cornel West says quite often, and it's very meaningful to me. And that is that the condition of truth is that it allows suffering to speak. And the implication, which sometimes Dr. West will emphasize, is that this means that for suffering to speak, suffering must be heard. So a condition of truth is that suffering is listened to, that it is attended. And when you listen to something, you are responding to it. And in responding to something, you're responding to life. And you are nourishing, feeding, sustaining relation. And it's relationality that the systemic arrogance cannot bear. The power of an arrogant system is its refusal to listen. But its refusal to listen is its most profound weakness. And that's what I want to kind of make a couple more comments about. And I want to refer to Glissant's book, Treatise on the Whole World. And whole world is hyphenated and capitalized. And he means by a whole world, not a totalitarian system, of course, but the whole world. The whole world cannot be dominated. The whole world cannot be or become a spectacle of controlled societies. The whole world is a living world. And he urges us in this treatise to listen to the cry of the world. And at the beginning of the treatise, he says that what we're hearing today, all the discord, all the conflict, all of the racism, all of the war, all of the brutality, all of the barbarism, all of the suffering is the suffering of the whole world. And it is coming through to us through gagged voices. At the end of the book, he encourages us throughout the book, but at the end, he comes back around to how he began, and he calls us to listen to the cry of the world, to listen to the cry of the whole world. Now, many people have been thinking about and cannot get out of our memory the images that we saw of George Floyd's death. And I don't want to revisit it at length, but I'd like to describe it in terms of a cry and a refusal to listen. And what was so painful to us, I think, is that we actually heard someone's life expressing their life for the sake of their life, and they were expressing it to another life, and that other life was refusing to listen, and it could not listen for whatever reason. Arrogance is a refusal to listen. And what it refuses to listen to is not messages, words, feelings, but the expression of life itself. And so systemic arrogance is a system that is fully communicable in terms of the power of discourse, but it is profoundly weak in its inability because of its refusal to listen. And so, as we watched that video, and as we heard the voice of George Floyd, we responded, and people responded all over the world to this cry. It was the cry of life, and it reflected the cry of an entire world that is suffering. And systemic arrogance cannot bear the whole world because the whole world is bigger than that system. And so systemic arrogance can listen to truth being spoken to it endlessly. It's not affected by truth because it's missing the condition that Dr. West has reminded us of, that truth allows suffering to speak, which means truth listens to suffering. So I just want to kind of close on a word of encouragement. And I want to promote with my small words an encouragement to listen through our futility, our sense of dispiritedness, our expectations to be heard ourselves by a system that will not listen to us, will not listen to our cry, whether it's true, it's real, or whether it's life. But we're to listen through that suffering and to continue to hear the suffering of others crying. And so Desant encourages us to listen to the cry of the world. And when we do, we respond with our own life. And so the point is not the whole world needs to listen to us, doesn't need to listen to educators, doesn't need to listen to our protests necessarily, but rather we need to be listening to the whole world. And they may not hear our voices, may not hear us, but they will hear our listening. And they are afraid that if we talk to one another, it's not our words to each other that is a danger to them. It is that we listen to each other. And if we listen to each other, we restore our lives. And I thank you for listening to me. And I encourage you to listen to everybody else who is saying something and those who are singing and sharing poetry. But listen to the cry of the whole world and refuse the arrogance of a system that cannot bear life itself. Take care.